Hello, this is Mrs. Taylor, and I'm going to walk you through how to complete the square, or excuse me, solve by completing the square when your solution is complex, which means your answer will have an I in it. So we're going to follow the same process we have in the previous two videos. We're going to group the first two terms together. We're going to divide b by 2 and square it to complete the square. And whatever I add, I also have to subtract. Or excuse me, that's not supposed to be a 12. It's supposed to be a 4. Okay? And then what I would do is I would replace the trinomial with the binomial squared. And I would get the constant value by dividing the b value by 2, which is negative 2. And then 12 minus 4 is 8. And then the next step would be to isolate the binomial squared. So I subtract 8 from both sides. And you may notice early on at this step that you have something that sends up a red flag. You have something being squared equaling a negative number. And so that's why our answers for this problem are going to be complex, which means we will have an I in the answer. We aren't going to write no solution anymore because we've learned about imaginary numbers. And so we're still going to solve this. It would just be an imaginary number instead of a real number. So I follow the same process. Take the square root of both sides. So I would have x minus 2 equals plus minus the square root of negative 8. So what we have learned in class is that when you have the square root of a negative number, you resolve that by pulling the negative out of the square root and replacing it with I, which represents the square root of negative 1. So I represent the fact that that is negative by writing plus or minus I square root of 8. And then the other thing we learned is that you always simplify your radicals. So square root of 8, if I factor that, I get 4 and 2. And 4 is a perfect square. In other words, if I factored it, I would get 2 and 2. And so there's a pair of 2's that I need to pull out of the radicals. So if I simplified the square root of 8, it would be 2 square root of 2. And so I have to simplify this even further by replacing square root of 8 with 2 square root of 2. And typically the order you write it is number, then your I, then your radical. The last thing I would do is I would add 2 to both sides. And remember, there are two cases. So I have where x minus 2 equals positive 2i square root of 2. And then x minus 2 equals negative 2i square root of 2. And usually when we are working with radicals or complex numbers, I could add 2 at the end of this, but typically it goes in front because we learned the standard form for writing a complex number is a plus bi. And so that would maintain that form. So on this side we have x equals 2 minus 2i square root of 2. And so those would be my two solutions for this problem. So it's a lot like the first one we did. It's just our answer had I in it instead of a whole number. So that's how you would complete the square with solutions that were complex numbers.